Good morning, guys. Time to get back to bedheads. We had the weekend off, and then yesterday took the day off. So we are picking things back up in John 11. If you have not been watching these again, you can go to theshepherdsfellowship.org, click the YouTube logo on the front page, which will take you to our channel. And then there's a section there called Bedhead, which you can pick up the last ones, because we've been in a series. This is the last one of a series talking about the death of Lazarus, which is kind of the end of his story specifically, but is also the launching point or the catalyst into the passion story that we're moving into. So might as well pick those up as we talk about the death of Lazarus, big situations, how God deals with them, how he sees things versus how we see things, how he responded to Lazarus' sisters, how he took care of a situation that no one could fathom how he was going to do so, and how that applies to our life today, especially in the area of evangelism, but also just in any problem that you might be going through, and how God sees things and how he deals with things. But we're picking it up today in chapter 11, verse 45, as we see what happened as a result of this big challenge that God took care of through his Son, Jesus Christ. So reading that, it says, "Therefore many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary, and had seen what Jesus did, raising Lazarus to life, put their faith in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin." And the Sanhedrin is just basically the most lowest common denominator. Sanhedrin is just kind of like a business meeting of the religious leaders. So they said to each other, "What are we accomplishing? Here is this man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, spoke up. "You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish." He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on they plotted to take his life. Therefore Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the Jews. Instead he withdrew to a region near the desert, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. When it was almost time for the Jewish nation, many went up to the country to Jerusalem for the ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. They kept looking for Jesus, and as they stood in the temple area, they asked one another, "What do you think? Isn't he coming to the feast at all?" But the chief priests and Pharisees had given orders that if anyone found out where Jesus was, he should report it, so that they might arrest him. Okay, so basically, again, we're dealing with the response of the raising of Lazarus, the response of when Jesus steps in and takes care of a big problem in a big way. It wasn't a big problem to him, it was a big problem from our viewpoint. And we find that when we go through a tough situation, we have a testimony, we have a story, we have an example that other people see, hopefully, if we're not hiding it. And Jesus did this in front of all the Jews that were there with Mary and Martha. He wasn't doing anything on the secret, on the side, like he had done actually several times before, where he didn't want a lot of attention. But here's a time where it's just a very public testimony. And this is why it's so important that we share our testimonies and what God does in our lives, because it's going to lead to a response. In this case, many of the Jews turned their life over to Christ. They put their faith in him. But some, so nowhere near the same amount, went to the religious leaders and told them what happened, causing another effect, which was jealousy, paranoia, fear, and they reacted against that as a threat instead of the good news of Jesus Christ. So we had kind of a different way of seeing this, and unfortunately in this story, and as we've seen over history, is the religious end of things, the church end of things, the spiritual end of things, when not in line with God, are the ones that mess it up. It wasn't the unbelievers. A lot of them believed, but when some came to the church got kind of all out of whack with it. They were upset that Jesus was moving. They were upset that people were coming to him. They were upset with miracles, the very things that God gave Jesus to prove who he was, which for most of us doesn't make any sense. Why would they be upset when God's moving. They're the ones who knew the prophecies from the Old Testament better than anybody else. They're the ones that should be watching for him. They're the ones that should be getting behind him. But we find that they were not able to do that because basically they were worried about their position. They were not worried about what God was doing. They were worried whether or not the Romans would see this, that the Romans would get upset, the Romans would take and follow them because they were under Roman occupation, and that they would come and take their place and their nation away from them, that they were more worried about the political status instead of what God was doing, which is an interesting message. When we go into a presidential season, we're going into a voting season, we see all these different issues going on, different ways that people react within the political, both non-Christians and Christians, the attitude that people take, the way that they act when it comes to fear, and the things that are going around. We see a lot of ugliness right now, instead of just submitting to God and following God and whatever God calls us to. I think it's going to be interesting. I do believe that there is a day coming where the church will be affected in some ways that are not biblical by the government. Now, I'm not one of these big doomsday on some of these things. I don't want to be like lumped in just because I said that with some other things you might have heard, but I do think there's going to be days that we're going to have to take some stands against what the government is trying to mandate. And I don't know where that will come from. It could be on same-gender marriages. It could be on abortion. It could be on all kinds of things. Just simply what we can and can't do to keep our tax status, whatever the case may be. And we need to be ready to take and follow God. It could be that God's doing something really, really good, and the government things are slowing it down. And we need to, again, be able to submit to leadership and from that standpoint, as long as it goes along with the word, and when it doesn't, we have to follow and submit to our God. So we need to be ready at a moment's notice to give up that tax status. I mean, like, we're talking about this in our family meeting in the church. We don't give our tithes and offerings so that we can have a tax write-off. We give because we give, and if the government gives you tax write-off, great. But there might be a day that we have to choose and say, you know what, I'm not going to be tax exempt because I got to take myself out of the system because the system no longer works with the glory of God. So these guys weren't willing to do that. You know, they had a situation. They didn't want to lose their status. They didn't want to lose their nation. And then, again, maybe that was part of it. Maybe they're caring about the people too. They just weren't doing it from a godly standpoint. So in the middle of all this, the leader, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, spoke up, and this is when you end up putting your foot in your mouth. He says, "You know nothing at all. You don't realize that it's better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish." Caiaphas knew something from a worldly standpoint. He made a statement that from worldly logic makes a lot of sense. But he did not go to God on it. He did not try to get discernment on it, did not get the wisdom from it. God tried to speak to him. God gave him a prophecy that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, that he would bring together even the scattered children of God, and that he'd make them one, and that's the gospel of Jesus Christ. He had the message from God, but instead of going for discernment on what that meant, he decided he knew what that meant. Well, then he needs to die, and when he dies, he will bring together the nation. And instead of going for the Holy Spirit wisdom and discernment on it, saying when he comes back to life, that then that resurrection is what brings them together. So he was off base. God didn't give him that full wisdom message. So they decided that was what they were going to do. They were going to find Jesus and kill him, and take things into their own hands instead of following God, which is something we really have to watch when we have our own situations. Make sure we don't have worldly wisdom, but godly wisdom. Make sure we don't take things in our hands, but we follow him in his hands. At this point, it says Jesus no longer moved about, even though people were looking for him in the temple. He didn't move about, which might, again, sound somewhat cowardly. It's not cowardly. Jesus did go for wisdom. Jesus did go for discernment. He knew it wasn't his Father's time quite yet, but it's right around the corner. And he was preparing for it. God was getting ready to prepare him for it. That's what we're getting ready to get into some more tomorrow. But we find that this situation, that should just be a beautiful, beautiful situation in the life of Christ, and knocking down walls and bringing people to the Lord, as many did come to him. But it also served as the catalyst to his death, because of jealousy and because of fear and because of lack of understanding, because of worldly wisdom. So we need to be very careful on how we react to the things that God does in our lives to make sure that we're following Him, that we're spurred on by Him, even if it puts us in uncomfortable situations, but that we don't transform those thoughts into worldly thoughts, and which leads us into death. So those are my thoughts. Maybe that applies to a situation you're going through, or something that you're coming out of, or maybe something that you need to reach into the life of someone else and counsel them as well. So that's my thoughts. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Be blessed.